It's very valuable, but humans just tend to be so self-deprecating of like, oh, my voice is so bad, or oh, I look terrible that day. Ugh.
It's funny, the older I get, the less tolerance I have for people who say things like that, because I'll just be a smart ass if they'll say, oh, I don't like the way I look on video, or I don't like the way I sound. I'll say, well, what do you think the people are thinking who you're talking to?
Right.
And the only way to get better is to work at it. Pick out what you don't like and then work on it.
Hey, Warners, welcome to another episode of The Women Your Mother Warned You About.
The podcast that makes business sexy again.
I'm Gina Tremarco, Master Sales Trainer with Sales Gravy.
And I'm Rachel Pitts, Master Sales Coach with Sales Gravy and entrepreneur, among other things.
And speaking of Sales Gravy, let's give a shout out to the sponsor of this show. Thank you, Sales Gravy and Jeb Blunt, for powering everything we do here.
And making us better at everything we do. I mean, honestly, and I'm not just blowing smoke, Mr. Blunt, but honestly, I think that being a part of Sales Gravy, even in the small way that I am and the big way that you are, there's just, it's an environment of constantly improving ourselves and it perpetually seeking out excellence in everything that we do. And it's just a lot of fun. And you will find that any experience that you have, especially if you get involved at salesgravy.university, you'll see that everything that Sales Gravy does is at the highest level to provide you with an extraordinary experience.
Amen to that. And I think when you are a high performer, you should always be, well, if you want to be a high performer, let's say that. If you want to be a high performer, you should always be in the mindset of learning and being coachable and being vulnerable and always seeing like a new way to doing things. And gosh, I just feel like I've learned so much under Jeb's tutelage.
Well, and sometimes what I've learned with my current coaches is sometimes your initial visceral reaction to coaching or suggestions is like, what? I mean, huh? No. But then when you really take a step back and absorb it and digest it and process the information, most of the time you'll see that it's coming from a place of trying to help you. And even though change is hard, it's always good to have somebody from a higher level looking at what you're doing and trying to help you grow.
Which is another reason why we do this podcast too, is we like to have guests on the show that can provide a different perspective or their way of doing it. And sales is sales is sales. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's very much common sense. And a lot of us follow the same ideologies. We just do them in a different way, which gets me excited about having Art Sobczak on our show today as our guest. And I started talking to you about this, Rachel, earlier. I've followed Art for years, but I had an interaction with him at Outbound where we bumped into each other at the bar. And I did buy him a drink. And I think that's what got me on.
That always helps. I
think that's what helped get me on his show. Buy him a drink. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think it's not ever going to hurt to buy someone a drink.
No, not at all. So I'm excited about this episode just because he's just the nicest guy, for one, but full of so much information. And I think we might have made him blush just a little bit.
Well, and anybody with, I think he mentioned 37 years of experience in the sales industry is going to have some serious knowledge to share with you. And Art definitely delivers some great tips. You just mentioned common sense, Gina, and he talks about even ways to use common sense in your smart calling.
Yeah, there's one thing that he said that got me thinking, that piqued my interest. I think he referred to it as inoculation training. Inoculation. We all have to, we've all gotten it. We all got the inoculation. We all got the shot. And I think our listeners are going to take a lot away from the importance of constantly, this is my takeaway, the constant need to practice, the constant need to learn and to train. And you don't just get one shot and you're done. That was my aha from this?
My big takeaway was one thing that he says. He talks about rejection on a sales call, that rejection is not actually an experience. It's the way we define an experience. And so he gets into that a little bit, and it's really interesting because I think that's one hurdle that we all face as salespeople when we are prospecting, especially on the phone, is we worry about that rejection. And Art gives us some tips and tricks to flip the script on rejection.
And just a quick bio before we get started with this episode, a little bit about Art Sobczak and his company Business by Phone. They've been helping hundreds of thousands of professionals say the right things by phone to get more of what they want. A little other info about Art. In 2012, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals for his contribution to the profession. And you want to check out his book, Smart Calling, which hit #1 on Amazon sales category. Is the very first day. It was named top sales book of 2010. And of course, he's got a revised second edition out there. So a little bit about Art. Sit back and enjoy this episode about smart calling. Awesome. We are excited to do another episode of The Women Your Mother Warned You About with our friend Art Sobczak. Welcome, Art, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Gina and Rachel. This is an honor and truly a pleasure, and I am excited for what's going to happen here. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I'm excited.
Who knows?
Rachel, should we give him should we warn him at all? Do you want to warn him all? Or should we tell him anything, or should we just, we did tell him before we start.
Let's just start with this. Art, how would you define a woman your mother warned you about?
Oh, do you want the absolute truth on this?
Absolute truth.
Yes.
I mean, why lie?
Well, I'll tell you what my mother warned me about. She warned me about a woman that I was going to get pregnant.
Oh, now we're on to something.
Wait, she warned you that you were going to get pregnant? Wait a second, back up.
No, that didn't happen back then, even though I think people think so now. But no, this was back when I was like in freshman, sophomore in high school. And the reason behind that is that I had cousins who had to get married when they were 16 and 17 because they got their girlfriends pregnant. And so that was her absolute worst worry. Bless her heart. Rest in peace. Yeah.
So it sounds like the warning was like, be careful of the girl who's going to get you in trouble for the rest of your life.
Yeah, like I didn't have anything to do with that, right? Is that the first time you've had that answer?
That is the first time. I kind of like it.
Well, that is one of those things that I think it's super important. And I had a really very candid conversation about sex with my kid. I mean, a couple of years ago. She's 13, and this was a couple of years ago, where it was basically like, okay, this is all going to come up. Here's the ways you get pregnant. Here's the ways you don't. I mean, it's important to know because it changes the whole face of everything.
Yeah.
And, it's a conversation that parents didn't used to have with their kids. Like, it was just kind of like the parents hoped that the kids would learn about it in school. But, your mom was right. Like, if you knocked some chick up, then you'd be beholden to that child and that woman for the rest of your life.
So true. And yeah, we experienced that in my family with cousins, and I was raised Catholic, and you got married. So that was that.
I'm trying to find a natural tie between this conversation of pregnancy and sales. And I'm for someone who can think on the spot, I have nothing. So I think we should just transition into sales conversation.
We've stumped
there's a way. There
you
is
got
a way.
something? What?
Yeah, because it's important to know the things when you're in a sales conversation that'll get you in trouble.
Yay!
Right? So Art, it seems like your company helps salespeople to know what to say on the phone. And so are there any tips out of the gate that you would tell salespeople like not to do that would get them in trouble immediately?
Well, yeah, let's define getting in trouble as, now I guess it's the serious part, kind of. Getting in trouble would be creating resistance right at the beginning of a call. And that would be simply talking about yourself, not having something that's relevant. And this is what I'm all about and have been for a long time. My flagship book is called Smart Calling, which is defined as let's know something about the people and the organizations and the situations that we're calling into before we call them, so that we can have a message that's relevant, which is so important in today's world because we're bombarded, everybody is, especially decision makers, with thousands of messages per day of all forms, and we must ignore most of them, if not all of them, because we're not going to respond to hardly any of them. And the ones we do respond to are the ones that are going to be all about us and what's relevant to us right now. So it still blows my mind that salespeople will just call up and say the same thing to everybody without knowing anything about them. And you guys probably get those calls and emails as well, where somebody wants to get 15 minutes on your calendar, even though they have something that's totally irrelevant to what you might never, ever be interested in.
24/7.
Oh, yeah. And the worst, which I actually did, I've told this story before, when a salesperson calls up and says, "Hey, how are you?" And you're like, "I'm interrupted by you." And I did this.
I love that answer.
One of the first times that I was, when Gina had been working for Sales Gravy for a while, and I was trying to get Jeb Blunt on the phone about something. And I just randomly called at lunchtime, and I'm like, I'll never get him on the phone. Well, he picked up right away, and I was so thrown off. I had my whole voicemail framework laid out, and I was so surprised that Jeb picked up that I said, "Jeb, how are you?" And I went, It's like the worst. It's like what he teaches not to do, and I did it, and I just was like so embarrassed.
What did he say?
He was very busy, and he brushed it off, and we moved on and had our conversation really quickly. But I was like horrified with myself. So important to control your emotions, even when you are surprised by someone picking up that you think will never pick up.
Yeah, that's rule number one in using the phone in sales. Don't be surprised if somebody may actually talk to you.
That's been happening to me a lot lately, and I've been super busy with training and coaching, and then in between I'm squeezing in prospecting calls or returning calls, and 9 times out of 10 people are answering the phone, and I'm like, okay, totally didn't expect them to answer the phone. And I'm getting totally thrown off, and I'm like, all right, it's not even being surprised by it. I'm like, I needed to budget more time. Like, if I only have a 15-minute window, I really shouldn't try to. I should just assume they're going to answer. And that, I had to change my mindset and be like, assume they're answering the phone.
Gina, wait a minute, time out. I read on LinkedIn that nobody answers their phone anymore.
Oh, I think I've read that too. Yeah.
I think, well, in a text messaging, instant messaging, Instagram world, people don't call each other that much. And especially like the millennial generation and Gen Z, they don't call each other as often as they text each other. So when somebody calls nowadays, people are actually more apt to pick up, it seems like.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because in workshops, I'll hold this phone up and I'll say, you can actually talk on these things.
You could actually hear a voice. Well, it's funny that you say that, Rachel, about the Gen Y and the Gen Z. I mean, I don't want to age myself, but I'm not Gen Y or Gen Z, and they are picking up the phone when I call them. So I think there might be some people are just getting inundated with the social media aspect of everything, especially since COVID, and people, I think, want to have a conversation. So are you tongue in cheek at, saying, "Oh, I heard on LinkedIn, nobody's answering." People want to talk to people because they're getting tired of, I personally am I tell clients and prospects, I'm like, either call me or text me because I don't have time to read your email. Yeah, there's too many emails.
And I mean, I don't want to indict an entire generation because I do know of millennials that are awesome at using the phone in sales and the prospecting process. But of course, there are. I think it's an individual thing, but yeah, probably more so, especially when you maybe even I was around some teenagers here last week, and I was just astounded how they were just like this when they're at a table full of adults and their nose is buried in the phone, as opposed to engaging with the people who are around them. It's like, hey, you have a real person here in front of you. How about if we talk? So it's not just a, on the phone thing. It's just communicating in general. And I've long said, I mean, for years and years, that if I ran a university or a college, there would be speaking skills as part of every class, even if it's a math or accounting class. Because if you look at the skills that are most important to us in any type of job, it's communicating.
You hit on such an interesting point. This gave me a little bit of a flashback, because you're talking about teenagers, right? And not necessarily salespeople. But this, I think, goes hand in hand. I think, having been around a teenage boy a lot lately, and learning quite a bit about teenage boys, I think some of it is like educating them and mentoring and teaching them to get off their phones. So I think there's some level of that. I'm not a parent, but sometimes I play one on the weekends. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with salespeople and sales leadership, to be teaching people to pick up the phone and answer the phone. What do you think of that, Art?
Well, it always amazes me when I talk to sales managers or leaders, and they'll call and they'll inquire about training, and they'll complain that, boy, my people just don't want to get on the phone. They're not making phone calls. They rather email. They would rather text. And therein lies the problem, because I'll just flat out ask them, who's running this operation? I mean, you're letting them do what they want. Weren't they hired to actually speak to people? I mean, that's how you sell, right? I understand social media and email and texting and all these things, but these are all tools ultimately that the goal should be to engage somebody in a conversation. And if and again, all these bad calls that I receive, and I make fun of them, and I'm known for reporting them and putting them up online and critiquing them. But I mean, ultimately, it has to start at the top. And I know you guys see this as well. And the very best organizations are sales organizations. They're not product or service organizations. And then they have that sales culture. And that means that in addition to the product training, they have sales training. Not once. I call it the inoculation. Vaccine's popular today, right? I call it the inoculation or vaccine method of training. I've had it. I had it once. And the best organizations do it continually. And as part of that, it's coaching and listening to calls and reviewing the calls. And that's just part of the job description. And then sometimes manager will say, oh, geez, my people don't like to have their calls listened to. And again, who's running the asylum here?
So what advice do you have for those sales leaders? Because we do have to trace it back sometimes. If we have poor performance from a sales team, whose fault is it really? And how do we get those sales leaders to step up?
Yeah, it's like the chicken or the egg thing. And I'll tell them, I'll say, this has to be there. This has to come first. And it has to be a condition of the job that, number one, you're making phone calls. Number two, we're going to record your phone calls. We're going to coach you on your phone calls. And we're not doing it to try to catch you doing something wrong. We're doing it so that you can get better. And I've been on the other side of that, where it was done in the wrong way. My first corporate sales position was with the old AT&T way back in the day, and the supervisors had to do call monitoring, and we always knew when they were doing it because they would go into the room with their stack of sheets, their monitoring sheets, And then when we would see them go in there, we knew, of course, that somebody was going to be monitored. So, of course, then we would be on our best behavior and do the things we're supposed to be doing. And then they would bring you in and you'd have this score sheet and you would have to hit all of the points on the call, which again is a problem with organizations sometimes I see, because they're going to grade them on certain things and people will hit the points, but they're not actually having a conversational call. They're doing the things like, okay, I'm building rapport, I'm asking these questions, I'm closing, but yet it's robotic, and they're following a robotic process as opposed to a conversational process.
Well, let's segue over and switch over to that, because you know how I personally feel about having an organic, fluid conversation from an improv perspective. What is your advice on how people can get less robotic and more human in their conversations?
By doing it more and getting more knowledge and practicing. We could bring up the topic of the S word, script. And normally when you mention the word script, people, their faces tighten up and they go, ooh, script, it's not me, it's not natural, it's not conversational, it's canned. But and I always like to point out, have you been to a movie recently? Have you watched a show on Netflix? Don't you think every single word that they're uttering is scripted? Yeah, absolutely. But does it sound like it? No, because they are so good at making it sound conversational that it doesn't seem like it's scripted. Now, with that being said, we can't script out the entire business-to-business consultative call because, well, customers and prospects don't have the script. So, yeah, I've tried to send it to them. They just don't follow. But if you look at the best salespeople you've ever been around, I would argue that everything they say, as conversational as it might be, is scripted because they know where they're going to go based on what they're hearing. And I mean, even in improv, I know you're responding off the cuff to what somebody's saying, but somebody has never, ever done improv before isn't going to be as good as somebody like you, because in certain situations what you're going to pivot to and what you're going to say. And the same thing is true with salespeople. So when I get an objection, I'm going to soften it and say, I understand, I see, oh, that's interesting, let's talk about that. And then I know I'm going to ask another question. And based on whatever objection I'm hearing, I've got a whole vault of questions that I might be choosing from. But it's going to sound like the first time I ever said it, but yet up here, it's scripted because I've done it so many times. And the thing about sales is that the more you do it, it's a performance sport, right? I'm speaking of the choir here. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So what advice do I have to sales leaders? Train constantly, role play, coach, work with salespeople, and also have them not be afraid of saying the wrong thing or sounding what they think might be stupid or getting a no. That's all part of the game. And I'm a golfer. Before you golf in the 80s, you got to golf in the 90s. Before you golf in the 70s, you got to go through the 80s. And Rachel, I know you're an athlete and you coach dancers, right? And same thing. So all those things come into play, and you guys probably get these questions too. I probably have one sitting in my inbox. What's that one voicemail that I can use that's going to get responses? Or how do I get people to get interested? It's like, there's an easy button. Boy, if you find it, let me know, because I could probably sell it for a lot of money.
And now a word from our fabulous sponsor, Jeb Blunt at Sales Gravy.
Hi, this is Jeb Blunt. There's a reason why thousands of sales professionals and top companies across the globe hone their sales skills at Sales Gravy University. You see, Sales Gravy University is different than most learning platforms. First, we have live courses taught in a virtual classroom by our master trainers that start almost every single day. And our e-learning platform is populated with hundreds of hours of sales training content produced by some of the top sales trainers in the world, including Gina's spontaneous selling course, which is worth checking out. Now, I've got some good news. If you've never taken a course on Sales Gravy University, if you're a new user, you can take your very first course for free. That's any course on the platform, absolutely free. Just go to learn.salesgravy.com. That's learn.salesgravy.com, or click the e-learning tab in the top menu at salesgravy.com. Pick out your course, and when you check out, use coupon code FREE-COURSE to get that course for free. That is free course to get your very first course for free.
Speaking of Sales Gravy University, go check out salesgravy.university and see some of the courses that I'm teaching. Just scroll through the university and click on them and you will find me and sign up. I'd love to have you there.
Well, yeah, when you were speaking, Art, I was thinking about when you were talking about recording and listening to calls and being monitored and all of that stuff. We use that a lot in performance and showbiz and dancers, because it's, when you can look back at video, especially, you can see really what's going on. And the same in recording a phone call and listening back to it. Even the most seasoned performers like myself, I hate to see myself on video, because you just pick out all the stuff that you did wrong, right? When you hear your own voice in a recording on a sales call, you just go, oh, my voice. But the thing about it is that once you start doing it more and more often, then you get used to it. You get over yourself, and then you're able to really, really grow and learn, because you can pick out the places where there's room for improvement. And it's just like you said, the habit is formed by just doing it over and over again to improve your actual process. But also it gets easier and easier to swallow, if you will, hearing yourself in a recording, seeing yourself on a recorded video, and not just being so uncomfortable with that, and then being able to use it as a tool. And then you kind of get excited about seeing the video or hearing the recording, because then you can improve even more by leaps and bounds. So it's also a practice. It's very valuable, but humans just tend to be so self-deprecating of like, oh, my voice is so bad, or, oh, I look terrible that day. Ugh. But once you get past that emotional part and get to the nuts and bolts of what you're actually trying to achieve, then it is just so helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny, the older I get, the less tolerance I have for people who say things like that, because I'll just be a smart ass if they'll say, oh, I don't like the way I look on video, or I don't like the way I sound. I'll say, well, what do you think the people are thinking who you're talking to? Right. And the only way to get better is to work at it. Pick out what you don't like and then work on it.
That's exactly what I say when someone's like, I don't like the way I look on video. I'm like, well, here's a spoiler alert. That's how you look.
Yeah. If you don't like it, you might want to do a makeover.
Yeah.
So if you think you look bad, then work on it. But it's an opportunity.
Yeah. It's that's how you look. That's how you sound. So just stop looking at yourself on camera, especially if you're don't look at yourself. Like, there are times I don't want to watch myself on video. I just listen. I'm like, okay, did I hit all the points? All right. I didn't want to watch. Right. It took me a long time to get used to hearing my voice on a podcast.
Well, here's a great story about the sound of your own voice. So I went to, this was when I was in real estate and I was coaching with the Tom Ferry organization. And I went to this conference and they were talking about your phone voice. And you know how people sometimes put on this, hi, my name is so-and-so. And it sounds fake. It doesn't sound like you. And what we were looking at is the different tones of voices. Some people do have a naturally higher pitched voice. Some people have a medium voice. When I get on the phone, I actually have a really kind of a low voice. And so I was the example of the low tone voice. And so I stood up and was like, hello, my name is Rachel. And all the rest of the day, I was the sexy voice girl. And since then, I was like, oh, my natural voice does sound better than the high-pitched fake voice that I've been trying to use. And it's actually more effective because it sounds more like me and it pulls you in and it really is effective. And so once that was pointed out that my actual natural voice is the best voice for me and it's special, and people comment on it all the time of like, wow, you got to have a sexy phone voice. And I'm like, I know. But like you sometimes are trying too hard to be something that you're not. And you just have to be yourself. And that way, like the person on the other end of the phone can tell when you're being fake. They don't know what it is. They can't put their finger on it, but they know when you're faking it.
Yeah. So many people have what I call corporate voice. Then they have regular natural voice.
Right.
And I mean, I've got pretty simple advice for people using the phone, and that is talk like you're speaking to a friend, not overly casual, bro, but making it natural. Quick story here for you. I was doing some training for an organization a number of years ago, and I'm listening to calls like I do before I do the training. And I was multitasking. I had some calls on, and this woman just sounded like, again, corporate voice. Hello, this is Mary Within, and I'd like to talk to you about our new Microsoft training. And so several calls went like that. And then I'm half listening to a call, and I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute, this sounds like a totally different person. But as it turns out, she was talking to a friend within the organization. So it was a personal call. And I thought, well, I probably shouldn't be listening to this, but I did. And so here's what she was saying. She goes, oh, yeah, this new guy at my gym, he is so hot. I always make sure I get on the treadmill behind him and I just watch him run. Oh, my God. So then, I mean, my gosh, I don't even smoke, and I wanted a cigarette after hearing that. So then she gets on her next call and she goes, hi, this is Mary with ABC Company. I want to talk to you about our Microsoft training. It's like, well, wait a minute. Where was the other person? So that was a great example of somebody that just wasn't themselves.
Okay, now I need to know, Art. Did you tell her that you listened to the personal call?
I don't believe so. No.
Oh man, what? Like, I was wondering if you coached her on being more that person than her stiff self.
I did go to her gym though the next morning.
That's awesome. Oh my God.
Well, and you hear that a lot in the world of woo-woo as well as in the world of sales, to be more yourself. So, Art, what would be your advice to someone who has a little bit of self-awareness that they are using that quote corporate voice that you're talking about, and how to just be more their natural self? Like, how do you get out of that? Because people get so nervous on the phone sometimes.
Yeah, and actually, let me back up here, because again, on LinkedIn or other places, I'll see people say things like, "Oh, don't use a script. You don't prepare. Just be yourself, be natural." And to me, that's the worst advice that anybody could have as it relates to being prepared for what you're going to say before you say it. Again, one of my favorite sayings is the absolute worst time to think of what you're going to say is when it's leaving your mouth in sales. So if I have the opportunity to prepare and to script out what I'm going to say, and there are a couple points in a phone call when we can do that. Of course, the opening, because most people still answer the phone with some variation of hello, right? And certainly the voicemail. So we can be totally prepared for what we're going to say there. And to get back to your question, which is how can somebody become more natural? Well, sit down for this, because this is going to blow your mind. You are sitting down.
Yep.
And that is practice, drill it, practice, do it, review it, keep doing it. Because how are we going to get better at anything except by doing it, right? And natural anxiety and maybe some fear is going to be there for a lot of people, but it's impossible for us to continue that feeling when we're engaged in activity, right? Because the things that we worry about the most normally don't happen. And I'll ask audiences, what's the absolute worst thing that has ever happened to you on a phone call? And people start sharing some things, and then we laugh about it. I go, okay, you know what? It's just a thing. It's so what? It's something that happened to you. And my whole thing on rejection is that nobody can reject you unless you allow yourself to feel rejected as a result of the experience. Because rejection is not an experience. It's the way you define an experience. Mm-hmm. And we have total control over the stories that we tell ourselves based on what happens to us. So if we have control over that, why would I tell myself a negative story? Because if you continually say, I got rejected on that call, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to avoid the activity that's causing us to have that feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like saying at the end of the day, I suck. And if you keep telling yourself that, you're going to believe it eventually. So if somebody says, oh, I got rejection, it's just part of sales. No, it's not. Experiences are part of sales. No's are part of sales. But the story you tell yourself is 100% in your control.
It's the mindset. You know, when I ran a theater, when I had an improv theater and I had improv performers, and even though we improvise, we do have frameworks within improv. So it's not like, I think a lot of people think that we're completely making it up. We are within a framework. What I always found interesting with my performers when they would get whiny about something, and usually they would get whiny about hearing the same suggestions from the audience. So for someone new to improv who's never seen a show, we take a suggestion from the audience, we fit it into a framework, and then we perform based on that. So a lot of times we would ask for, we need a suggestion of an activity you would do on vacation. Because we're in a tourist destination. And 9 times out of 10, the first suggestion from the audience would be parasailing constantly. And so we know that 9 times out of 10, we're going to get parasailing as a suggestion. It's like preparing for an objection. You know what's coming. And so what would happen at the end of the show is we'd have a debrief at the end of a show, and they're like, just so tired of the parasailing suggestion. I'm like, own it. You know it's coming. It's their first time saying it to you. It's the 100th time you heard it. By now, you should be so creative with this suggestion because you know it's coming. This is easy. And then the other piece of it, and people are like, I'm like, oh, we have an improv practice. You have an improv practice. How do you practice improv? We have to practice the framework constantly. That's why we look so good at it.
It amazes me they would whine about that, because it seems to me that if you get it over and over, that's a chance to come up with better responses to make it funnier.
Yes. Yes. But don't we do that as salespeople too?
Yeah.
I mean, they complained about price. They always complain about price. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you the opportunity to prepare for it so you can sound more natural every time you get it, not have to search and go, oh.
Yeah. I wrote down what you just said. Rejection is not an experience. It's the way we interpret. I think you said we interpret an experience.
Yeah, define, interpret.
The way we define an experience. And it's so true, because it's so all in our heads. If someone rejects us or says no, but it's always an opportunity to follow up with the person and say, hey, maybe it's a not now. And it's not, but yet salespeople, especially ones that are just so concerned with closing the deal right then, instead of looking at the possibility that it could close later. Like Gina and I just talked about it the other day on a podcast, that sometimes we throw away something we think is done, but just the people are not ready at that moment. And then they'll call you back when they're ready to sign and get it inked. And it's just a matter of how you define that moment.
Well, I mean, look at it. Every single experience should be a learning experience. And here's a shock to some salespeople. Hey, we're not going to sell all of them. In many cases, it's just not a fit, or maybe not now, or maybe we didn't do a good enough job. So after every call, I always suggest we ask ourselves a couple questions. One is, what did I like about what I did there? Because what gets rewarded gets repeated, even if we're doing it ourselves, right? And then the second one is, what could I have done differently, or what will I do differently next time? And if you can answer that question, you got to win on that call, because we can learn. And if we got tripped up by something, let's find out why. And then let's come up with the answer for next time, or a different question that we're going to ask. And therein lies the problem with a lot of salespeople. They get off the call and go, oh, I got rejected. Next. As opposed to, okay, what can I do? What can I change? Because it's likely something that we caused. I mean, salespeople create more objections than were ever there by talking too much and talking about things that are not relevant to the other person. And if they just get out of that mindset and instead, I mean, personally, I'm paranoid about talking about what I can do until I know completely how I could help the other person. So what has to come first? Well, obviously the research even before the call, and then the questioning to identify what is it that I might be able to help them with.
I'm going to share a little story. I'll be a little transparent of some things that I've recently learned and I have been coached on. And, Rachel had said, that's what triggered the idea when she's like, we realize maybe it's not a good fit. And so maybe it's a not now, but it's a later. And I'm going to layer to that, because I think sometimes as salespeople, it's easy for us to also use that as a story we tell ourselves. Well, it wasn't a good fit for them. And I share this because I was recently schooled on this very well about a conversion problem I was having. And the conversion problem was I wasn't helping really walk that prospect through a journey and help them revisit what their goals were and get them back into a place of out of fear to make a decision. And it was very easy for me to be like, well, they're just not ready right now. Maybe they'll be ready later. And it was my fault that I did not bring them through the journey. And then as soon as I learned this, got schooled on it, reevaluated it, and then put in a new discovery process in place, boom, all of a sudden I was like, got my mojo back and started closing again.
Greatest way to sell is to help people buy and help them sell themselves, right? And yeah, I agree. If somebody early on, without going through the whole process, says, oh, it's not a fit. Yeah, it's not a fit because you have no idea what the hell they're interested in, what they do, what their needs or pains or problems are. And the great thing also about taking them through that process is now you're putting them in a frame of mind where they're thinking about the problem or the pain or their desire. And once they get into that frame of mind, then it becomes much easier to make your recommendation because now they're already nodding their head as opposed to shaking their head.
Especially, and this is especially important for our listeners, this is especially important when they raise their hand and they come to you. And this is not cold prospecting. This is when they come to you, interested in you, and then you decide they're not a good fit and they decide they're not a good fit, but they're just scared. So this is, I think, even more prevalent if it's someone raising their hand from an inbound perspective.
Yeah, it's so funny on inbound calls. Sometimes sales reps are so excited because they have the inbound lead, and then they just start puking all over themselves, talking about what they have. I had a VP of sales contact me, and I mean, she was, very cold. And I answered the phone, business by phone. This is Art. And she goes, yeah, this is so-and-so with ABC company. And I've heard about you, and we're looking to do some sales training. So tell me, why should I hire you? Kind of in that tone of voice, actually probably a little bit more gruff. And I said, I have no idea. Why'd you call me? And she spent about the next half hour telling me why. And I was just prompting her and listening. And then she loosened up, and we wound up doing some business. So yeah, let people talk. That's I think the biggest thing in sales. Let people talk, and it's probably one of the hardest things for newer salespeople to do because they feel like they just have to get out all these things that they know, as opposed to again asking the questions. Listening with the intent of understanding, as opposed to just waiting your turn to talk again.
Mm. Well, before we start heading into our signature questions, I've got one more question for you, and then maybe Rachel does, or she'll head straight to our famous questions. But before we move on, are there any other tips that you can give our listeners on? I want to specifically hit on something in your bio about your reputation has been built on providing common sense, non-salesy, non-gimmicky conversational methods. A couple suggestions that you can give our listeners on how to have, this is a hard one, how to have more common sense, be non-salesy, and be non-gimmicky?
Well, I would say forget about the salesy techniques and things that have been passed along over generations, such as you need to overcome objections with these rebuttals, and you need to memorize these particular closes. And because buyers can see techniques coming a mile away. And I believe one of the reasons I've had such a long career is that it's refreshing when people hear training that is comprised of the way that people actually talk, as opposed to the salesy type language. And one very simple suggestion I have for salespeople is, especially new ones, is that you really have to be others focused. I know that sounds idealistic and a cliche, but it absolutely is true. We can't start with our product or service and say, how am I going to sell this? I suggest that before every call at the beginning of the day, you look at who am I going to be talking to here, and why might they possibly be interested in what we have? And going through the smart calling process, that means, again, doing the research online, offline, doing social engineering, talking to other people in the organization so that I can find out where are some possible needs or pains or problems so that I can come in with I call it a possible value proposition, because we never know what's going to be of value until we actually speak to somebody, right? Because we can't engineer value in, they can only extract it out. So we go in with this is a big word for me, hypothesis of value. And that is, this may be of some interest to them. They may be interested in prospecting training because I know that they need new logos because I see some of their posts on LinkedIn and so on. And then I start with the premise, okay, so why might they be interested? I'm going to start with that as opposed to, I'm going to pitch them on my prospecting 2-day workshop. No. And then we validate these things through our carefully planned questions. And here's something else. I suggest that the best salespeople not only are prepared for the answers they want to get to their questions, they're prepared for all of the answers they don't want to get. Those are the ones we should be prepared for. And again, going back to the framework in improv. And that's how we can sound natural, conversational, and like a human as opposed to a robotic salesperson that nobody wants to talk to.
Oh, that was some juicy stuff, Art. Thank you. That was great.
Awesome.
Good stuff. Yeah, definitely listening and Gina, with her improv training that she does so very well, it's so crucial to not be always thinking of that next question you're going to ask or the next thing that you're going to say. And it really is a hard skill. Like, I have to actually take physical notes while someone's talking, because I will sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to say this next. Oh, I'm going to say this next. I'm going to ask them this, instead of continuing to listen until they're really done talking so that I can really hear what they are saying. It's definitely a skill to practice for sure.
Practice.
Yeah. All right, Art, are you ready for the signature questions?
Okay.
You can do this.
Buckle up here.
Not so bad, but the first one is the best one. So how would you define the word sexy?
Sexy.
Well, I guess I would define it like the late Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart defined obscenity. I know it when I see it. That's the easy answer. But the more in-depth answer is it's not just appearance. I mean, let's face it. In our society, first impressions are normally made by appearance. But for me, it's the total package. It's somebody that is intelligent, somebody that is funny, somebody that is confident and carries themselves well. I mean, my entire career, for the most part, I've worked with people using the phone. And I very rarely had ever seen somebody in person or on screen before I sold them. And we had numerous conversations. And I could tell by speaking to some people that, I'm thinking that is a sexy person just based on what I was hearing. And, maybe it was that deep voice like you were talking about. But again, it's I don't know if I'm ducking the question here, but it really is. It's the total package, and it's not just appearance. I mean, appearance comes into play, but there's just so many things involved. And somebody who maybe we're not attracted to by initial appearance, we can become very sexy based on getting to know them, watching them, hearing them, interacting. So
love it. That was awesome, Art.
I know. I'm pretty sure I've never heard, we haven't had anybody talk about the fact that you can tell if someone is sexy just by talking to them on the phone, like that they're confident, they're funny, they're intelligent. I mean, heck, there was a whole industry like in the 90s was pick up the phone. Like,
are you talking about 900 numbers? Is that?
Yeah. But I mean, there's a certain intrigue to that, though. You make a really good point, Art, that when we ask them that question, it's immediately like when you physically encounter a person, but it's not necessarily that at all. The phone, as you have illustrated in this podcast today, Art, is such a powerful tool that you can come across as a very a confident, intelligent, funny, and valuable entity to the person on the other end of the phone. It's really great. Good answer.
Absolutely.
So next question, what's the best advice you've ever been given, Art?
Well, I think that evolves over time. And I'm going to share something that actually I just learned or heard a few years ago. And I've had coaches my entire life. I mean, I've invested a lot of money, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in coaching in a variety of different areas, personal development and marketing and sales, of course. And just recently, Jim Fortin, who's a transformational coach, works on mindset. He talks about how everything is just a thing. And that kind of goes back to what I've been saying for a long time about rejection. And too many people get all worked up on something that happens, like getting cut off in traffic or getting a no, or I mean, even take something major like an illness. You look at it and go, okay, you know what? That's just a thing. And something else he says is that, and nothing has meaning until I give it meaning. And everything that's going on around us every single day of our life, every single minute, is our interpretation of what's going on. And we are in total control of our interpretations. And if somebody's having a bad day, they're getting bent out of shape, it's because they're interpreting it that way. So something happens, you just look at it and go, somebody cut you off in traffic. Somebody might say, oh, that idiot, road rage comes to mind. Or you could say, wow, that person's in a hurry, or I wonder why they're in a hurry. And it totally changes your outlook on life. So everything is just a thing.
That is awesome. Everything is just a thing. It's so true.
Oh, that sounds like the title of this show. This could be the episode title.
Ta-da. And last question, Art, what advice do you wish you had been given?
Well, I'm very grateful in that I've had a long and great career. I'm not sure I would do a whole lot differently, but I think I probably would have done a little bit better if I thought bigger earlier in my career. And again, I know that that's a cliche, but it is so true. It's true in sales. It's true in life, because for salespeople, it takes normally just as much effort to go after a bigger sale or ask for a bigger sale than it does a small one. And you're going to get, exponential rewards. So, starting out, if I would have thought a little bit bigger, maybe gone after some bigger things, probably would have done a little bit better, a little bit sooner. But again, no regrets. 37-year overnight success.
I love it. I love it. If people want to get more of you, what is the best way to connect with you, reach out to you, get your book, all the things?
I would say go to my blog site. We're going to be transitioning everything over to that, which is simply smartcalling.com. Smartcalling.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you do, please personalize your message. I've got a pet peeve there. So personalize your message. Tell me that you heard us on this wonderful podcast and what you liked about it.
I love that. And when I was on your show, several people reached out to me on LinkedIn and personalized the message that they heard me on your show.
Great. Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on this episode of The Women Your Mother Warned You About. We hope that you feel good after this and it wasn't as scary as you thought going in.
I'm relieved. And it was. You guys made it so easy and so much fun, and time just flew, and I can see why you guys are as successful as you are.
Aw, thanks, Art. Aww. Thank you for being on the show. And thank you, Warners, for listening to this episode of The Women Your Mother Warned You About, brought to you by Sales Gravy. And for more information about the show, you can go to womenyourmotherwarnedyouabout.com and all the socials. Anything else, Rachel? What did I miss?
And be sure to check out salesgravy.university for all kinds of fantastic courses and workshops on how to improve yourself in sales, including some really great ones that Gina hosts, including spontaneous selling and what to say when you don't know what to say. Both very fantastic. And I have taken both and love them. And if you would be so kind to leave us a review at iTunes, it helps us to spread the info and the love to more peeps.
Oh, I just remembered, when this episode comes out, you'll still have a chance to sign up for the next What to Say When You Don't Know What to Say, October 14th. So I had to put that plug in there. And with that being said, we're out of here. Bye, Art. Bye, Rachel. Bye, Warners.
This really will get serious soon.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. I don't think anybody wants it to be serious.